to the Sync My Music podcast. This week, I am very excited to bring on board Ron Riddle, and Ron Riddle is actually a direct composer for many major cable networks, and so he's actually had a very long career, much longer than mine actually, directly composing for very popular TV shows, reality shows, dramas, you name it, he's done it all. He's also been the drummer of Blue Oyster Cult, so he's actually been touring. I think you've toured around the world. I would imagine you have. So you've definitely toured. You've definitely put in your time. And what's interesting is that Ron reached out to me because he was also affected by this Discovery Networks issue that was happening last month, and it's obviously still unrolling right now. And so he was one of the few that actually had some insights into the situation, and he knew what was going on. So Ron, thank you for informing me and allowing me to inform my audience about what was happening. And we're still going to see what unfolds there. We still have a lot of stuff to uncover. But what I want to do is basically talk to you about how you got into this side of the business, because I want everybody to understand, whatever everybody's listening, I want you guys to understand that what Ron does is very different than what I do. We are obviously in the same industry. We're both syncing our music to TV shows, movies, and commercials, but Ron is directly getting video files from, let's say, Discovery of the episode or a scene that they need custom music composed to. It's very different than what I do. For the most part, what we do with production music libraries is we actually create full albums without using video assets, and we just create basically music that we think could be useful for various outlets. Sometimes it's reality shows, sometimes it's ads, sometimes it's trailers. It could be in various different outlets. So our models are a little bit different. So what I want to do with this interview with Ron is just dive into the weeds and find out what it is that he does, how it's different than what we do. And if you guys are listening to this podcast, I want you guys to be aware of maybe this is an outlet or a direction that you want to try to dip your toe into if this sounds really exciting and interesting to you, okay? So Ron, thanks for joining me today. I really do appreciate your time. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and your backstory for how you got into this side of the business.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you. So my backstory is a little bit off the beaten path, I would say, because, I was a touring drummer for Blue Oyster Cult at the time. At the same time, I actually rescued a timber wolf. And what happened was I wasn't able to leave or go on the road anymore without, taking the animal back. And he would have definitely have been euthanized. So, they contacted us. We had like 24 hours to make a decision on that. So we moved on it. I couldn't, bear to actually take him back, or, I made the commitment to say, that's not going to happen. I'm going to stick with this. So I ended up having to figure out how to make a living by being in my home, because I couldn't actually leave the property because the animal was, bonded to me. So, it was that kind of a situation. Most of my colleagues think I'm a complete, nutcase, which, jury's out. So at any rate, let's see. So I had to, figure out how to make a living. And let me get back to that one. So I ended up, I've always done like short pieces, like, instrumental pieces, and really didn't think much of them, although I've always, composed music for bands and that kind of thing. But so what I ended up doing was, the same thing that you do and what other composers do. You go out and you hit the road and you, well, back then I was mailing tapes, so people would hear it. But long story shorter, I ended up getting some significant gigs with Discovery when Discovery Pictures was, that was the model that was their high end, Discovery was very different in, like, say, this was like 1997. So they were very different. They were like a mom and pop shop. And they did really, their high end stuff was this, Discovery Pictures, which was like a blue chip type, wildlife stuff for the most part. And that was like great to get involved with that. And the money was great, and just everything about it. The quality of the work was really enjoyable.
Now, how did you actually stumble into Discovery Networks? What was your connection, or did you attend an event? Did you know somebody? Like, what actually got you into that door?
Yeah, I ended up. I've always been sort of as you can tell, I've always been a wildlife kind of advocate. So I ended up going to the. It was a film festival that was specifically wildlife. So it was, wildlife filmmakers. It was held in Jackson Hole. So, so I went there and, just met people just out of the blue. Passed around tapes. Did a lot of cold calling after that. And it took about a year for anything to happen, really. But then things started happening, and so one of my first gigs was actually in the Discovery Pictures realm. So that was, it was awesome. I had done like some video stuff before that, but I found that I really loved writing the picture. So I think that's the main, and I just had a real love for that, because the textures that you put to, how the actual film looks, the motion of it, the coloring of it, everything about it, is a sound, some sort of sound source to me. So it was very exciting work.
Now, what I think, Ron and you and I connect on is we're both drummers, and now we're both producers and composers. So when you were getting into this world of discovery and pitching your music for sync opportunities, did you have those skills already built in? Were you just a drummer and then you were just learning this stuff? Or were you maybe working on this on the side of your touring gigs?
No, this was totally something that was new to me. And at that point, there wasn't really any sort of programs or instructions or a guy like you that you could see on YouTube, which didn't exist at that point, as far as I know. And to get some sort of direction and like someone to lead you down the road with that. So I really was working totally on my own with it and having to figure out how to do this craft. And that was really exciting. There was a lot of stumbling blocks for sure, like with the time code and the sample rates and particularly back then, it was all over the place. Now it's a lot easier. You just, pretty much plug. You can, it's a lot easier to deal with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love those stories too, because you are obviously self-made, right? You just kind of knuckled your way through it. You just kind of like decided, I'm going to do this, and I know there's going to be stumbling blocks, and I'm sure you made tons of those mistakes just like I did in the beginning. But of course, the important thing is not that we avoid mistakes. That's impossible. We're human beings. You should be making mistakes. That's the only way you're going to learn. But the important thing is that you don't make the same mistake twice, or at least you try to make them way less often, right? You really try to learn from what you've done before that didn't work out, and you do something better. So I love hearing these kind of stories of people that just figured out how to do it, especially back then, which was much more of the Wild West than it is now, right. Especially with the equipment, the software, the DAWs, right? All that stuff. There was just a lot more you had to be aware of back then. So why don't we dive into then what your job really looks like on your side of the business? So let's put yourself in the shoes. It's a typical Wednesday. You've been working with Discovery for years now, and here's another project they're throwing you away. Could you give me like a typical, what kind of a show is it? How much music would they ask you to determine or to deliver for them? What kind of deadline is that going to be? Like, what does the brief look like when you get a gig from Discovery?
Typically it'll be, and this varies, but typically it'll be an hour show, which, with commercials, that kind of thing comes down to like 40 some. And it's a lot of the shows that particularly, a lot of the shows were wall to wall music, they're just, and it's a lot of work, particularly to write original music for that stuff. in the period of a week or two, possibly. The Discovery Picture stuff, I think they gave me a couple of weeks, 2 to 3, which was really good because that's more of a feature film kind of situation. The other stuff, was just, it's quick. It's quick. There's no leeway there was no leeways with the deadlines. The deadlines are hard and fast, and I stayed up I just wouldn't sleep. And I was doing multiple projects at the same time. This one time, I remember not sleeping for like close to maybe an hour a night for like 7 months.
Wow.
Just such a burnout.
Yeah. Now, when you got a gig like that, and let's say it's the 40-minute episode, and they want you to put music basically from start to finish, are there specific time code stamps where they say we need music here and here, or is it basically they trust you as the composer to make those kind of decisions? How does that work? Or is there maybe like a revision process? You send the first draft, they say, hey, we want to change this and this. How does that whole process work?
Yeah, it works exactly like that in all cases. So it varies from producer to producer, from editor to editor. They're all different. They all, some of them are very hands-on. Some of them just trust me, and they say, just do whatever you feel, and so it's different that way.
And with one 40-minute piece of content, how many, I know that this would vary, but like, is there an average number of cues, like original cues you would have to compose for that much video? Are we talking 30, 50 cues? How much are we talking here?
Usually it's 50 to 60.
Wow.
Yeah.
And in a week or two?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Because I've been telling my students for my side of the business that you should be averaging at least 2 to 3 tracks a week to continuously build up your catalog. 50 to 60 in 2 weeks. That's basically 20 to 30 a week. I can't imagine the kind of pressure and stress you've been under. So what sort of techniques or tips would you use to make sure you always could crank out that much music in that short of time? Was it templates? Was it preset plugins you would always go to? Or how would you do that?
A lot of times I would take pieces of music that I'd already written, and strip them down, and then you have a template, and then you build it with the scene. Obviously you pick one that seems like it would work, and a lot of the music changes every, even 15 to 20 seconds to 40 seconds, so there's a lot of stuff like that. It's a scramble to the field.
Yeah. Was there any chance or any time when you would be able to have a sort of kind of an available catalog of previously composed music that you could basically maybe find purposes for it? Or was every gig like 100% it needed to be a brand new original music, never before released?
Most of the time it was, just supposedly to be brand new 100% music.
Wow. That is a lot of work. I'm sweating just thinking about that right now.
Yeah. The only way that I could have been able to do it was, with the deadlines, is like someone pointing a gun at your head and saying, right, because otherwise I would just, never be able to crank out that much.
So Ron, we've definitely now talked about all the stressful parts of the job with the tight deadlines and all the work you have to do, but you obviously do have a lot of joy for this side of the industry and for what you've done. And I want you to maybe talk a little bit about that joy when you finally create that perfect piece of music that just marries perfectly to a moment in a show, or to a transition, or to an emotional highlight of a episode that you're working on. Can you talk a little bit more about that experience?
Yeah, I think that in a nutshell is really the reason for doing it, for wanting to do it, that feeling that you get for that one, maybe it's only like 15 seconds or something. Hopefully it's more, but it was, there's nothing like that particular feeling, because you've really created something new from the ground up, to something. So you really, it becomes something that is outside of you. Then it's like I could always tell when a piece was finished because it would be married to the video so completely that you wouldn't even notice it. That the music the whole thing would go by, and it would just, you would forget that there was music there. You wouldn't even notice there was. So there's those moments too, but certainly those are um, those are the real, the real pieces of gems, when you get to them.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you bring up, because I do tell when people say like, well, what kind of music gets placed? What should I be working on? I say, turn on your TV, turn on your streaming service, watch the kind of shows that you think your music would be applicable for, and pay attention to the background, because I think exactly what you just said is so true, that you'll watch these TV shows, and I'm guilty of this. Every time I watch something, I forget about the music. They do it so well, and it matches the mood and the emotion and the pacing of this so much, I don't even think about the music, and I'm really just thinking about the plot or the contest or the adventure that the main characters are going on. And that's a big part of success with this industry, is that our music is, for the most part, not the shining star. We're not in the spotlight. It's not about us. It's not about our music, which is really hard for a lot of producers and musicians. It's a big pill to swallow, because we are so used to being on stage and having, people look at us. So it is a very interesting skill set that you have to have, and a sort of a personality trait that you have to be comfortable with, not getting the spotlight and really understanding that you are there to serve this project. It is about the project. It's about the story. It's about the emotion. And if you are trying to distract the scene with your music, if you're trying to steal the spotlight in any way, your music will be wiped out of there so fast, because it isn't about you. Maybe you could talk a little bit more of that, how that works in your career.
Yeah, well, just like you said, it is, and for me, it was very much like it was a process, because being a drummer in a very well-known rock and roll band, it's you're used to that attention. You're used to making a splash when you do something. And it's a very different gig. You want to be not noticed. That's what you really want, but you want to be able to add to the scene, in a way that's so necessary, but it doesn't draw attention to itself.
And how would your schedule look like in terms of, I know we've talked about, the crazy hours you were working, but would you ever get times for vacation, ever times to just say, I need to take a week off? Nothing like that, huh? Just 100% go, go, go.
Well, I've always sort of like taken vacations depending on what gigs were happening, so if I had a vacation booked, a good gig came in that I really wanted to do, that always came first to me, rather than the vacation. So obviously my wife at the time would be very angry at those kind of things.
Well, and I ask that because, burnout is a big problem with our industry, as you know.
Yeah.
So many people, and I, now educating producers for over 3 years now with Sync My Music, it's the number one thing that happens. It's like you hear about sync, you hear about licensing, you hear about this great industry, you get all excited about it, you throw out a couple of albums, you partner with some libraries, and 6 months later, it's just crickets. This producer has gone away. They didn't get the immediate, six-figure salary they were hoping for right away, or whatever their issue was. But there was a burnout that happened, because it takes a long time to build up your royalties and build your relationships in this business. So I've always emphasized, taking care of your health. Obviously, that includes taking care of your mental health. And of course, as we just got through the holidays, I think taking a break is obviously very, very important, even if it is just during the holidays. If that's all you can kind of squeak out, that's something better than nothing. But yeah, maybe if you could talk a little bit more about that, finding life balance, because I know that like if you would continue it on that pace, your entire life, at some point your health would have given you something, you got to sleep, right? So I do want to make sure that I'm responsible, that when I teach, producers out there, that I let them know it's, good, especially when you're young and in your 20s and maybe early 30s, you can survive without a lot of sleep. You can go, 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 go. But once you get a little bit older, there does need to be a little bit more of a heavier emphasis on your health, because if this is going to be your long-time career, right? 30, 40, 50 years, you're never going to make it unless you really do pace yourself. Do you have any lessons maybe you can share with us about how you paced yourself?
Yeah, this is another one where, the Timberwolf, his name was Chance. That was the reason I actually got into scoring. I had to, it was, but he also was the reason that I probably was able to maintain health through that, because I got him at like a year old, and he was just so much energy, and I had to actually run him at least an hour a day at the beginning, like 3 times a day. So my stamina and my health really, was able to be preserved for, years because of that, so he definitely saved my life there.
Yeah, I always say that about my dog, is that like I don't take her for walks. She takes me for walks multiple times a day. And thankfully, because it is an excuse when she comes and bugs me to get outside, go get some sunshine, go for a walk. And I'm really thankful that she's here, because that allows me, and it gives me that perfect excuse that I got to get out, get away from these computer screens, right?
Yeah. Otherwise, you'd just be stuck there. It's really hard it's hard for me to remove myself, so it was definitely a strong force that made me remove myself and get out and run and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Now, I just want to ask, after you would finish one of these episodes, let's say, would you make a point to watch it afterwards? Would you ever watch your work on TV?
At first it was really exciting to watch it on TV, and it's always kind of fun to sort of like stumble on it still. But there's a point that you get to where it's, you don't need to, and yeah, you don't need to see it all the time. And in fact, I kind of like not looking or listening to my work unless I'm going to learn something from it, learn what not to do, or something that I did that I really like, that I want to try to repeat that. Other than that, I really don't go out of my way to listen to stuff I've already done.
That's interesting. Is there a specific reason why? I actually agree with you, by the way. I same thing with mine, but I'm curious what your reasons are for not listening too much to your old stuff.
I think besides the fact that I'm disappointed easily, I think that it's a way of sort of feeling like what's next, what's always next, I mean, what's good about seeing something like that is that you are actually, it's kind of a landmark or something, and you go, okay, I've done this, now I want to do that. But other than that, it's just, I like to think of what is the next thing, all the time.
Yep, I think you and I are on the same page for that if you're always looking what you did before, you're basically living in the past. You're kind of like, either celebrating your past experiences or celebrations or anything like that. And I remember this being in LA for so many years, going to so many studios. And, this producer I'm working with, I'm there with my guitar to just add some guitar to his track. And he's sitting there looping the same 8 bars for 4 hours. And there's not much going on in it, but he's so excited because he's never heard his music this loud. And he's basically getting high on his own supply, right? That's what's really happening right there. Because it feels good. It's like, that's my music. That's my beat. And you're cranking it up. And it feels good, but it's like cheap junk food. It's not going to keep you moving forward. And I think that's one of the things that I started learning. It kind of bugged me and annoyed me so much that I was like, I'm going to be the opposite of that. I'm going to get this 8 bar done. Okay, done. Move past it. Let's build our chorus. Let's build our next section. And I do like to go once in a while, zoom out, take that 10,000 foot view of the entire track, start to finish, close my eyes, really listen to it. Is this working? Walk away from things, come back, have some fresh ears, that kind of thing. Because we can really delude ourselves into thinking something is much better than it actually is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we actually do agree on that. That I would give that as advice. I think we both would to everybody watching here. That you don't want to be that producer that's always talking about what you did 5 years ago. It's really sad, and it also kind of makes your mind stagnant in a way because you're always stuck at something you've already done. And it really is one of these industries where it's a double-edged sword where you really are as really only worth what you have done lately in a way, right? You're
Right.
only as valuable to this business as to what you're working on now or what you just accomplished. But if you're going around telling people I did something, in 84, okay, that's great. We're in a completely different world now, right? And I think you're right to keep a sort of forward momentum in your career. It is best not to lurk and hang around in your past work and in your past stuff. So
The other thing I'd like to add is when you're writing the picture, particularly, you are hearing like the same, like, bar, 3 bars, because you're like you're having to sync to the picture and get it perfect. Everything, the instrumentation, everything that works with that scene. And once you've heard something 50 to 100 times, there's just no way that you really want to. The last thing you really want to do is to go back and listen to it again, unless you're getting paid or something.
yeah, exactly. I didn't even think about that. It's just the whole process of producing the track. You're obviously repeating it over and over again.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have mentioned this in the beginning. I know you obviously work with Discovery, but you work with other networks as well. Can you maybe list off some of the notable either networks or just TV shows that you've worked on in your career?
Yeah, sure. National Geographic, A&E, History, CBS. Those are probably the main ones.
And these were all direct composing gigs you had?
Yes, right.
Now, how did that happen? How do you go from just, because as I understand it, in the beginning, you were just with Discovery, right?
Um, yes, I mean, Discovery was really my main gig, and has been probably 70% of the time.
So how would you find your way into these other networks for new opportunities? Would you just pitch? You just send your music out, or?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, but it was a pitch. I mean, you meet other people within other networks, and particularly, for the last few decades, I think National Geographic and Discovery have kind of been like side by side in a lot of ways, even though the content is a little different. But a lot of the same people that work at Discovery at some point worked at National Geographic. And say when Discovery cleans house, all these like companies clean house and they like fire everybody, like they fire all the good people even. And those people then will go over to National Geographic or vice versa, or History Channel or any of those. So that's kind of how that happens. You get kind of a stable of producers, editors, that kind of thing, and then they start getting mixed up because, traveling to these different places because of the industry.
That makes sense. Yeah. And it mirrors exactly what happens on my side of the business, that I've worked with so many libraries where one person I knew at that library left, went to another company, but kept my number in their phone and hit me up and said, I'm working with this new company. Would you like to work? Because I know that you can deliver the goods. So you're absolutely right that once your brand is established, once your reputation is there, that you're the person that's hungry, you're available to work, and you always deliver on time or over deliver. Your name will definitely be following every important player that goes around. So that's good to know that could also be possible. If somebody were to want to get into your side of the business where they're directly composing for some of these networks, do you know of any trade shows or networking events or any methods that you think might be the most fruitful to give it a shot, or just a simple email to some of the music directors at these companies?
It's always all a little different. I would say that, if my advice to a composer is, what are you interested in doing? What is your passion? Like what type of programming do you really like? And then you can suss out the different, film festivals and events, and that way, but, to try to really focus that. If you want to do everything, then that's somewhat easier, but for me, I wanted to do, kind of a certain thing in a way. Um, so,
I
yeah.
found that as well, and it's interesting that you bring that up because I've worked with libraries that say one of the libraries I work with now, they're like, we do a lot of sports content. We are going to do a lot of sports placements, and we need our writers to actually love sports. It's actually a requirement. So actually they put that on their sort of submission process to say, if you're not into sports, don't even get into it. So for me, I was like, well, there's certain sports I like, and I like watching basketball for the important games. I'm not like an all-season guy, but for the playoffs and for the finals, like I love that. Soccer, I grew up playing soccer, so there's definitely some of that. I know there's not a lot of soccer programming, obviously, in the U.S. And obviously, other sports, I like the bigger games. But I did have to make that a point to say, like, yes, like there's definitely a part of sports that I find, and I played sports as a kid. I think it's a really important thing. And I think you're right, like that you do need to line up with people. It's not just about, all right, here's some music for this content because we're trying to make money and that's it, right? There is something underneath it that's a little bit more important for that you have to really believe in the content and the purpose and the cause of whatever it is you're composing to. Now, I've definitely had music on Keeping Up with the Kardashians, so I am very aware that I have music on a lot of content that I'm not a fan of. I don't watch. It's not, but it's also the same time, it's not what I pitched to. It's not something that I was going out. But there are, for every TV show like that I'm just not huge into, there are some great shows and some great competition shows and things that I think are really awesome and really engaging and sometimes even very educational. So it's sort of the double-edged sword. And with you and your path, you're obviously a lot more in control of that because you're actually controlling where you're going to go compose, what network you're going to go work with. Whereas when you work with production music libraries, it's kind of like whoever their clients are, right? Whoever wants to come and use your music, if you've signed it over for an exclusive distribution deal, they have rights to use your music and anything they need to. So I think that's an important thing for everybody to understand, that is going to be possible. If you are really anti-TV or anti some TV shows or something like that, just be aware of that, keep your ethics in check and your morality in check and make sure you're very comfortable with your music getting out there. Just something to be aware of. So with that being said, Ron, I really appreciate your time again. And if you could leave us with any sort of parting words of wisdom for somebody who's listening to this right now and just thinking about getting started in sync licensing in general, whether or not they're going to go for a direct path like you did, or they're going to go with music libraries like I have, what sort of key things would you say they need to keep in mind and remember before they go on this crazy journey of making this their full-time job?
Well, the two things that I would recommend is write to your passion. I mean, really, what you're interested in, go for that, seek contacts and, content that is that. It'll be a lot easier for you to write in that. It will be more exciting, more rewarding. The other one, which is probably a longer, we could do a whole episode on this, but it is, keeping as much of your rights as you possibly can. Don't just give it away to the first, the first offer. Do what you have to do, obviously, because that's what we have to do. But, to just try to, I have always tried to keep all of my publishing, which is unheard of actually right now. But if you can keep as much of your royalties and as much of your publishing, even possibly, do it, because that will be, that will kind of be the gift that keeps on giving, and it'll just keep on rewarding you that way. And you'll, it's good to have money.
Yeah. And it's great to have passive income, more importantly, because we don't want to be doing this forever. We do love making music, but at some point you might decide, you know what, I'm good with this, I'm going to move on to something else. But the great part about this business is that as you walk away, those royalties keep on streaming in. And so that's what's really great and very powerful about this side of the business that you can't find if you're just a touring musician, because if you don't go play, you got no money. There's nothing coming in. So that's the one thing that really attracted me to this side of the business, is that I want to have a retirement plan. I love passive passive income? Who doesn't want to get paid multiple times for doing the same work you did once? And every time I log in and see a new royalty check where it's like, hey, there's a new $1,500 placement from a track that I made in 2010. I don't even remember that track. A lot of times I have to go back and listen to it and like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that. It's such a great reward, and it's such a great surprise in your inbox to find new money from old work you've done. And it is a very smart way to go, especially as a musician, as somebody who's, making music your full-time job is hard enough as it is. But not only with this industry can you make it your living, but you could make it your retirement plan. You can thrive with passive income possibilities. So anybody who's listening to this, I hope they understand that that's what this is really all about. So thank you so much, Ron. I do appreciate your time today, man. And I will put your links, any links you want to include, I'll put those below in the video if anybody wants to come and reach out to you or
sure,
just check you out. I'll be happy to do that for you. So that's it for this week, guys. And stay tuned, because next week I'm going to basically be talking to you guys about who I don't think is appropriate to get involved in sync licensing. As I've been mentoring and coaching thousands of students at this point in 3 years, I've definitely come up with some sort of guidelines and some personality traits that I just think don't work for sync licensing. So if you don't know whether or not, even after this conversation, you don't know if it's the right fit for you, definitely stay tuned for next week's episode, because I will make it crystal clear. And if you listen to that episode and realize, you know what, that he's kind of describing me, then I want you to find out and decide that right now. I don't want you to waste a year of your life or 2 years of your career going down the sync licensing path to realize, oh, I don't like this at all. So I hope that I can scare enough of you guys away that realize that this is just not a good fit for you. But what I'll do on the following week after that is I will do the opposite list. I'll actually make all of the reasons for who sync licensing would be perfect for. So all the personality traits and what I think, what kind of a composer really would be a good fit for this kind of industry. So it's going to be sort of a part 1, part 2 kind of a podcast. So stay tuned, guys. That's coming to your way starting next week. Thank you for listening to the Sync My Music podcast. If you enjoyed the show and want me to do more episodes, all that I ask is that you leave me a review on whatever platform or app that you're listening to. It just takes a few seconds. I'll never charge for this podcast, and I want to keep it 100% ad-free. And your review right now will help me do just that. Thank you so much.